Before kings, before cities, before history itself, there was Sumer. In a land between two rivers, scattered tribes learned to tame the land instead of fearing it. They built canals, harvested grain, and for the first time, they had more than they needed. With surplus came trade. With trade came wealth. With wealth came power. But power is never safe. The first cities were born: Uruk, Ur, Kish, Lagash. And with them, the first rulers, the first armies, the first wars. Bronze reshaped everything: stronger weapons, bigger empires, and the first written laws. But no civilization lasts forever. Sumer rose. Sumer ruled. And then, Sumer fell. For 4,000 years, it was forgotten. Until now. How did they rise? Why did they fall? And why does their legacy still shape the world today? This is the story of the first civilization. This is Sumer. For thousands of years, the land that would become Sumer sat empty: no cities, no kings, just endless stretches of marshland and dry plains. People came and went, small groups of hunters, wandering from season to season, never staying long enough to leave a mark. But then, something changed. No one knew exactly where they came from. The Sumerians appeared suddenly, their language unlike anything spoken before or after. They didn't speak Akkadian. They didn't speak Egyptian. Their words had no known relatives, no clear ancestors. It was as if they had come from nowhere. Some believed they had always been there, descendants of the earliest farmers who tamed the rivers and turned wild grasses into wheat. Others thought they had arrived from somewhere else, a migration so ancient that even the Sumerians themselves had forgotten it. But wherever they came from, they weren't like the others. Because for thousands of years, humans had lived in simple villages, farming the land, trading in small markets, worshipping in tiny shrines. But something was happening in Mesopotamia. People weren't just living together. They were building cities. They weren't just farming for survival. They were managing vast irrigation systems, controlling floods, and storing surplus grain. Trade wasn't just local. It stretched across entire regions, connecting Sumer to the Indus Valley, Egypt, and Anatolia. This was the early Bronze Age. Before this time, people relied on stone and copper tools. They were useful, but weak. Weapons broke easily. Plows dulled quickly. Construction was limited. Then, someone discovered bronze, a mixture of copper and tin. It was stronger, sharper, and more durable than anything that had come before. And Sumer embraced it. Bronze-tipped plows made farming more efficient, allowing Sumerian cities to produce more food than ever before. Bronze weapons, spears, swords, and battle axes, gave Sumerian soldiers an edge in warfare, allowing them to dominate their enemies. Bronze tools transformed construction, helping build the ziggurats, palaces, and massive city walls that still stood centuries later. Sumer wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. In a time when most humans still lived in huts, the first Sumerian settlements grew larger, denser, more organized. It began with a culture now known as the Ubaid, circa 6500 to 4100 BCE. These early people mastered irrigation, carving canals into the landscape, forcing the wild rivers to bend to their will. They built mud brick houses, not just for families but for entire communities, some stretching across miles. But what made them truly different wasn't just their size. It was their structure. For the first time, people weren't just living together. They were organizing. Some worked the fields, while others wove cloth, shaped pottery, and built tools. Society was dividing itself. There were leaders, workers, and, above all, priests. Because in Sumer, everything revolved around the gods. At the center of these early settlements stood temples, massive, towering structures unlike anything seen before. They weren't just places of worship. They were the beating heart of the city. Temples controlled the grain, measured out the water, decided who ate and who starved. The gods, or at least the men who spoke for them, ruled everything. And so, the first signs of power appeared. Some controlled the land. Some controlled the labor. And those at the top controlled it all. The simple villages of the past had transformed into something new, proto-cities, each one growing larger, more complex, more powerful. And this was only the beginning. And soon, it wasn't a village anymore. It was a city. Its name was Uruk. By 400 BCE, Uruk had become something the world had never seen before. A monument to human ambition. It stretched across miles, housing tens of thousands of people, more than any settlement before it. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a center of power, wealth, and control. At its heart stood a massive structure, the Anna Temple Complex, built in honor of the goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and dominion. It wasn't just a temple. It was the beating heart of Uruk. The priests inside didn't just perform rituals. They controlled everything. The temple became a warehouse, filled with grain collected from farmers. It became a bank, where debts were recorded. It became a court, where disputes were settled. For centuries, Sumer's great cities were ruled not by warriors, but by men of the temple, the Ensi. These high priests claimed they were the chosen representatives of the gods, ruling not by the sword, but by divine favor. Their power was absolute. The temple controlled the land, the grain, the trade. The Ensi oversaw irrigation, taxes, and justice. Every major decision, from war to the building of canals, was approved by the gods. But then, Sumer changed. As the cities grew, so did their ambitions. Wealth increased, population soared, and trade flourished beyond the rivers of Mesopotamia. But wealth attracted enemies. The lands beyond Sumer were watching. Elam to the east. The Gudians in the north. Raiders from distant lands. The temples, once symbols of peace and prosperity, now needed something more than prayers to protect them. They needed warriors. And in the city of Kish, one man saw what was coming. His name was Enmeber-Gizi. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a man who waited for the gods to give him power. He took it. He was the first king in recorded history. Enmeber-Gizi was not just a ruler, he was a conqueror. For the first time, Sumer had a leader who did not simply govern a city, he sought to dominate others. His greatest enemy lay to the east, Elam. Elam was a land of warriors, a powerful kingdom beyond the Zagros Mountains. They had always been a threat to Sumer, raiding border towns, disrupting trade, testing Sumer's growing strength. But now, for the first time, Sumer struck first. Enmeber-Gizi gathered an army, a force larger than any Sumer had ever seen. His soldiers were armed not just with spears, but with bronze weapons, a new kind of metal that could cut through enemy armor, that could shatter shields, that could turn battles into slaughter. The war between Kish and Elam was the first recorded conflict in human history. And Enmeber-Gizi won. The victory was so great that his name was carved into history itself. Clay tablets from centuries later still recorded his triumph. His power was so absolute that the great city of Kish became the dominant force in Sumer. But power, especially the kind built on war, never lasts forever. Because even as Enmeber-Gizi ruled, a new challenger was rising. After Enmeber-Gizi's death, his son, Aga of Kish, took the throne. But his rule would not go unchallenged. To the south, a new king had risen in Uruk. His name was Gilgamesh. And for the first time in history, two kings would fight, not over land, but for dominance. Kish had ruled Sumer, but Uruk was coming. The era of warrior kings had begun. Everywhere, the same pattern repeated. Cities grew. Their rulers fought for control. Armies clashed. The first walls were built, not just to keep wild animals out, but to keep enemies at bay. Inside those walls, markets bustled with merchants, artisans crafted fine pottery, bronze tools, and exquisite jewelry. Trade routes stretched as far as the Indus Valley and Egypt. Sumer became the center of an economic revolution, where wealth was no longer measured in food alone, but in goods, services, and contracts. But with trade came a new problem. How could a merchant remember what he owed? How could a temple track the grain it collected? How could a ruler keep records of taxes, labor, debts? For thousands of years, people had tried. They used tokens, symbols, knots and rope. But the more complex the cities became, the more those methods failed. And then, in Uruk, something new was created, writing was invented. At first, it was simple. Marks pressed into clay. Just lines, circles, and scratches, nothing more than a system for tracking trade. But as the years passed, the symbols evolved. They stopped being numbers. They became words. And with that, everything changed. For the first time in history, words could outlive the person who spoke them. Laws could be recorded. Stories could be told. Rulers could issue decrees that lasted beyond their reign. The world had entered a new age. The age of writing. And with it, the city-states of Sumer had become something unstoppable. The first civilization in history had arrived. And by the time the rest of the world was still figuring out farming, Sumer was already a civilization in full bloom. Its cities stood as testaments to human ambition: Ur, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Kish. Each one a powerhouse of trade, innovation, and influence. Their walls stretched for miles, their temples towered above the streets, their leaders commanded armies, ruled economies, and oversaw the most advanced society the world had ever seen. This wasn't survival anymore. This was domination. At first, Sumer's wealth had come from the land: wheat, barley, dates, the lifeblood of their civilization. But as their cities grew, so did their ambitions. The rivers had given them food. Now, they would give them power. From Ur's massive harbors, wooden ships loaded with grain and textiles set sail, heading for lands so distant they might as well have been another world. They traveled south to Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain, west to Egypt, north to Anatolia, and east to the distant Indus Valley, a place the Sumerians called Meluha. They imported gold from Egypt, copper from Oman, timber from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. And in return, they sent out their greatest invention, writing. Clay tablets with cuneiform inscriptions traveled across the known world, keeping track of debts, agreements, and royal decrees. For the first time in history, trade wasn't just done by memory or trust, it was written, recorded, sealed in clay for eternity. But writing wasn't their only invention. Sumer wasn't just the first great civilization. It was the birthplace of knowledge. When the floods came, they measured the waters. When they planted their fields, they tracked the seasons. When they built their cities, they calculated angles, distances, and weights with precision. And to do all that, they needed math. So they created a number system, base 60. Why 60? Because it divided easily into whole numbers, perfect for accounting, engineering, and timekeeping. The Sumerians were the reason a circle has 360 degrees, why an hour has 60 minutes, why a minute has 60 seconds. But they didn't stop there. They recorded the stars, tracking their movements centuries before the Babylonians or Greeks. They predicted lunar cycles, mapped the heavens, and divided the year into 12 months, a system still used today. And when they built with purpose. Massive irrigation canals stretched across the landscape, feeding thousands of acres of farmland. They turned deserts into grain fields, marshes into cities. For the Sumerians, knowledge wasn't just power, it was survival. They didn't just build cities. They built systems. They measured time, tracked the stars, experimented with medicine, and laid the foundation for nearly every scientific discipline we take for granted today. But to them, science and magic weren't separate. A disease wasn't just an illness, it was a curse, a punishment from the gods. The stars didn't just move, they spoke, revealing omens of war, famine, and fortune. Numbers weren't just tools for trade, they held the secrets to building temples, irrigation canals, and empires. And in Sumer, those who understood these mysteries weren't just scholars. They were gatekeepers of reality itself. And when someone fell ill in Sumer, it wasn't because of bacteria or viruses. It was because a demon had entered their body, or because they had angered the gods, or because a spirit from the underworld was dragging them toward death. And so, healing wasn't just about herbs and remedies. It was about magic. The first medical texts ever written weren't just lists of symptoms and treatments, they were instructions on how to appease the unseen forces that controlled health. A clay tablet from Lagash listed a disease called Hand of the Ghost, what we might call a stroke or paralysis today. The cure? A mix of herbal medicine and incantations, whispered over the patient by a priest-physician. Another tablet described the tooth worm. The Sumerians believed that cavities were caused by tiny worms burrowing into the teeth. To cure it, the priest would recite a spell, then apply a mixture of herbs and crushed minerals to the infected area. And for those suffering from fever, infections, or pain, the healer would prepare a remedy, often made from opium, myrrh, mustard plants, or licorice root. But for the worst cases? Surgery. Surgery and healing incantations. Sumerian doctors knew how to stitch wounds, set broken bones, drain abscesses, and remove tumors. They performed operations with copper tools, disinfecting wounds with beer or wine. But they never worked alone. Even the most skilled surgeon needed the gods on their side. Before every major procedure, the healer would perform a ritual, offering prayers to Gula, the goddess of healing, asking for guidance. Because no matter how advanced their medicine became, they still believed that life and death were in the hands of the divine. But while the healers of Sumer looked inward, searching for signs of sickness, another group of scholars looked outward, toward the heavens. Everywhere else, nature dictated life. In Sumer, humans dictated nature. But the Sumerians didn't just build cities. They built ideas. For the first time, humans weren't just telling stories around fires. They were recording myths, passing them down, shaping religion and philosophy. They saw their gods not as distant beings, but as rulers, judges, warriors. Enlil, the storm god, who granted kingship. Enki, the god of wisdom, who gave humans knowledge. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who could bring down empires with a whisper. And these gods didn't just exist in temples. They shaped every aspect of life. The Sumerians believed humans were created to serve the gods. Every harvest, every war, every decision, all of it was dictated by divine will. But one story stood above the rest, a continuation of the story of Gilgamesh that we talked about earlier. Long before Homer, before the Bible, before anything else, there was Gilgamesh. He was a king unlike any other, 2/3 god, 1/3 man, ruler of the mighty city of Uruk. His strength was unmatched, his arrogance unchallenged. And so, the gods sent him a rival, Enkidu, a wild man who ran with the animals. They fought, nearly destroying Uruk in their battle, but in the end, they became brothers. Together, they went on a journey unlike anything the world had ever imagined. They slayed the monster Humbaba, defied the gods, and in their greatest act of defiance, they killed the bull of heaven itself. But the gods do not forgive. As punishment, Enkidu was struck down, his body wasting away, leaving Gilgamesh alone, for the first time, aware of his own mortality. And so, the great king set out on one final journey, a desperate quest to find the secret of eternal life. He traveled beyond the edges of the known world, met Utnapishtim, the only human to survive the Great Flood. And he learned the truth. No man can escape death. And when Gilgamesh returned home to Uruk, he finally understood. It wasn't immortality that mattered. It was legacy. It was what he built, what he left behind. And in that, he had already won. Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Kish, these cities had become the envy of the world. Their kings ruled with the backing of the gods, their merchants traveled beyond the known lands, their scribes recorded history itself. They had conquered time. But there was one thing even the Sumerians couldn't control. What rises, must fall. But before we talk more on this, let's quickly talk more about the gods of the land. In Sumer, the gods were everywhere. They weren't just distant figures, locked away in the heavens. They walked among the people, ruled their cities, decided who lived, who died, who became king, and who was cast into the dust. And no one, not the most powerful Lugal, not the wealthiest merchant, not even the mightiest warrior, could defy them. Because in Sumer, the gods didn't just own the world. They were the world. Every city had its own patron god, a divine ruler who decided its fate. Some of them were merciful. Most of them were not. At the top of it all sat Anu, the god of the sky, the father of gods and men. He rarely interfered in human affairs, because he didn't need to. His mere existence was law. Below him stood Enlil, the storm god, the one who granted kingship. He was the god of wind, of war, of absolute, undeniable power. When he spoke, rulers bowed. When he was pleased, Sumer flourished. When he was angry, floods destroyed cities overnight. Then came Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. He was clever, unpredictable, always bending the rules. He was the one who taught humans how to farm, how to write, how to build civilization itself. And then, there was Inanna, the goddess of love, war, and chaos. Beautiful and deadly, worshipped and feared. Inanna was the force no man could control. She could bring life or take it away. She could raise kings to glory and rip them from their thrones. In war, she was unstoppable. In love, she was devastating. And when she wanted something, nothing in heaven or earth could stop her. But the gods didn't rule alone. They had their representatives on earth. And in Sumer, that meant the priests. The temples, ziggurats, weren't just places of worship. They were fortresses of control. They held the grain, the gold, the contracts. They controlled trade, dictated laws, managed irrigation. They decided who received blessings, and who suffered famine. Every harvest, every shipment, every drop of water belonged to the gods first. And the priests, as their chosen representatives, made sure of it. To defy them? To defy the temple? That wasn't just a crime. It was blasphemy. Rituals, festivals, and offerings, keeping the gods satisfied. Every day, the priests tended to the statues of the gods, washing them, dressing them, offering food and drink as if they were living beings. Every morning, the city waited. Had the gods been pleased? Were the omens good? Would the rains come? Would the rivers flood? Would war break out? If the gods were angered, they had to be appeased. That meant sacrifices, not of humans, but of cattle, sheep, grain, beer. It meant festivals, massive processions where the entire city would gather to celebrate, to dance, to drink until the gods themselves seemed to walk among them. And at the heart of it all, the most sacred ritual of them all, the sacred marriage. Every year, the king, the Lugal, would symbolically marry Inanna, the goddess of love and war. In a grand ceremony, he would enter her temple, offering himself as her lover, her servant, her earthly representative. Because in Sumer, kings didn't rule by force alone. They ruled by divine right. And without the favor of the gods, they were nothing. But no matter how much wealth a man had, no matter how many blessings he received, he could not escape death. And in Sumer, death was not a reward. The Sumerians had no heaven, no paradise, no place of eternal rest. They believed in something much darker. A realm known only as Kor. A vast, endless underworld, silent, empty, hopeless. When a person died, they were not judged. Their soul simply descended into the darkness, stripped of everything, wandering forever as a shadow of what they once were. The only thing that mattered in the afterlife was memory. If the living still remembered you, if they still brought offerings to your grave, then you could at least eat, drink, exist. But if you were forgotten, you faded. Your soul starved in the darkness, lost for eternity. And for a time, it seemed like Sargon's empire would last forever. But the first cracks in Sumer's power didn't come from within. They came from Akkad. Sargon the Great had forged the world's first empire, but his legacy didn't last. His sons and grandsons struggled to keep the empire together. Rebellions erupted. The conquered Sumerian cities, Ur, Uruk, rose up, demanding their freedom. And then, the famine came. For years, the crops failed. The rivers changed course. The land that had once been so fertile turned against them. With the empire weakened, an even greater threat emerged: the Gutians. The Gutians were not like the Sumerians. They had no great cities, no temples, no writing. They were raiders, warriors from the Zagros Mountains, a people who lived by the sword and took what they needed. And now, they wanted Sumer. Wave after wave, they attacked the cities, moving through the countryside, burning villages, taking slaves. The great city of Akkad, the heart of the empire, fell first. Then, one by one, the Sumerian cities collapsed. The Gutians didn't rule like the Akkadians had. They didn't rebuild, they didn't organize, they didn't govern. They took. And under their rule, Sumer began to rot. Trade routes collapsed. Temples were looted. The cities, once filled with life, became ghost towns. For nearly a century, Sumer lay in ruin. But then, one last golden age. One final attempt to restore Sumer's former glory. From the ashes of the old cities, one ruler rose to reclaim what was lost. His name was Ur-Nammu. He wasn't just another warlord. He was a builder. A lawmaker. A king who believed Sumer could still be saved. And for a moment, he succeeded. Under his rule, Sumer was rebuilt. The great city of Ur became the center of the world again. Massive ziggurats rose from the dust, temples reopened, and trade flowed once more. Ur-Nammu issued one of the first known law codes in history, even older than Hammurabi's. He brought order to a land that had been in chaos for nearly a century. For a time, it seemed like Sumer had been saved. But time was running out. The world had changed. While Sumer had been recovering, other civilizations had been learning. To the west, the Amorites, a rising power, were watching, waiting for their chance to strike. To the east, the Elamites, an old enemy, had been gathering strength. And all across Mesopotamia, a new kind of weapon was changing warfare forever. The chariot. Light, fast, deadly. Pulled by trained warhorses, armed with archers who could fire on the move. For centuries, Sumerian armies had fought in tight formations, heavy infantry clashing with shields and spears. But now, warfare was about speed. Mobility. Shock tactics. Sumer had been built for a different kind of battle. And now, they were outmatched. Ur-Nammu's dynasty held on for as long as it could. But in 2004 BCE, Ur, the last great Sumerian city, fell. The Elamites came first, sweeping in from the east, smashing through the city's defenses, tearing down its temples. The last king of Ur, Ibbi-Sin, was captured, paraded through the streets, and taken as a prisoner to Elam. His city, the last remnant of Sumer's golden age, was left in ruins. Then came the Amorites. They took what was left of the land, piece by piece. And out of the chaos, a new power emerged. One that would reshape history. One that would rule over Mesopotamia for centuries. Babylon. Sumer, the first civilization in history, was gone. Its cities lay in ruins, its temples looted, its people scattered. The great ziggurats that once reached toward the heavens crumbled into dust. But Sumer was not forgotten. The empire had fallen, but its influence refused to die. Long after the last Sumerian king was dethroned, its conquerors kept its traditions alive. The Babylonians came first. They didn't erase Sumer, they absorbed it. They took the old cuneiform script, refined it, and used it to record their own laws, their own myths, their own history. Babylon's greatest ruler, Hammurabi, created one of the most famous legal codes in history, but he wasn't the first to write laws. The Sumerians had done it centuries earlier. The Assyrians followed. They took Sumerian knowledge of war, engineering, and governance and weaponized it. They learned from Sumer's mistakes, they built stronger fortresses, developed standing armies, and used advanced siege tactics that made them unstoppable. Even the Persians, who ruled Mesopotamia long after Sumer had vanished, still used the cuneiform script to record their royal decrees. But it wasn't just laws, writing, or war. Sumer's gods refused to disappear. When the Akkadians conquered Sumer, they renamed the gods, but they never abandoned them. Enlil became Elul. Inanna became Ishtar. Enki became Ea. The same gods that ruled over Sumer continued to rule over Babylon, Assyria, and even the lands beyond Mesopotamia. By the time the Greeks arrived, Ishtar had become Aphrodite. Her stories had changed, her temples had different names, but her origins went all the way back to the great cities of Ur and Uruk. The story of a great flood? First recorded by the Sumerians, long before it appeared in the Bible. The concept of an underworld, where the dead wandered for eternity. First imagined by the priests of Ur. Even the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great literary work, didn't die with Sumer. It was copied, translated, and retold for centuries. It influenced ancient Jewish, Greek, and even Persian storytelling. The kings of Sumer had fallen, but their words lived on. By 2000 BCE, no one spoke Sumerian anymore. The language had died, replaced by Akkadian, then Babylonian, then Aramaic. But even though people stopped speaking it, they never stopped writing it. For nearly 2,000 years after Sumer's collapse, scribes and temples still copied Sumerian texts. Priests still learned its ancient hymns. Scholars still used it for religious and scientific records. In the same way Latin survived in medieval Europe long after the fall of Rome, Sumerian survived as the sacred language of Mesopotamia. It was too important to forget. But for thousands of years, Sumer was a ghost. The Bible spoke of Babylon. The Greeks and Romans wrote about the great Assyrian kings. But Sumer? It was buried, literally. For centuries, its cities lay hidden beneath the sands of Iraq. No one even knew the Sumerians had existed. That changed in the 19th century. European archaeologists, searching for evidence of biblical cities, dug deep into the ruins of Mesopotamia. What they found shattered everything historians thought they knew. In the ruins of Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and other ancient sites, they uncovered thousands of clay tablets, covered in strange, wedge-shaped writing. It wasn't Babylonian. It wasn't Assyrian. It was something far older. Slowly, archaeologists decoded the forgotten language of Sumer. They uncovered laws, myths, business transactions, evidence of the first great civilization. And then, in 1922, one of the greatest discoveries in history was made, the royal tombs of Ur. Beneath the ruins of the once mighty city, archaeologists uncovered burial sites filled with gold, jewelry, weapons, and artifacts dating back over 4,000 years. The remains of ancient Sumerian kings and queens were pulled from the earth. A civilization that had been lost for millennia had finally been found. The Sumerians were the first civilization. And in many ways, they are still with us. But what does that mean for us? Was Sumer's fall inevitable? Was it the environment, the changing rivers, the salinization of the soil, the droughts that strangled the land? Or was it human failure, war, corruption, leaders who refused to adapt, a system that could no longer sustain itself? If Sumer had changed its ways, could it have survived? Could the priests and kings have shared power? Could they have built a system that lasted longer than a few centuries? And most importantly, are we any different? Every great empire thought it would last forever, until it didn't. The same patterns have repeated throughout history. Rome. The Mongols. The Ottomans. But if the Sumerians could see the modern world, the towering cities, the global trade, the unstoppable flow of information, what would they think? Would they see progress? Or would they see the same mistakes being made, just on a much larger scale? And if our world faced the same kind of crisis, a collapse of resources, wars over land and power, rising sea levels that swallow cities whole, would we survive? Or would we fall, just like Sumer did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you've made it this far, you are now part of this story. The Sumerians may have disappeared, but their legacy survives, because of those who choose to remember. If you want to keep uncovering the secrets of the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Because the past is never truly gone, it's just waiting to be rediscovered.